Good evening, and welcome to WSLR's Election Reflection live stream. It's been a week since Election Day, and what a journey it has been. After days of vote counting and constant refreshing of our screens for the latest election results, Joe Biden was declared our president-elect on Saturday. Yet President Donald Trump continues to refuse to concede the election and is continuing to pursue legal challenges. Despite disappointments in a number of races where they expected to be more competitive, Democrats did hold on to their House majority. Control of the Senate now hangs in the balance, with 2 Georgia Senate seats headed for a runoff election in January. So there's much to talk about. And tonight, WSLR is pleased to welcome a special guest to reflect on the results of the election and discuss what it all means for progressives moving forward. I'm joined now by Tom Walker. Tom is the outgoing chair of WSLR and Fogartyville, and he's also the host of our Peace and Justice Report on WSLR on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Hi, Tom. How are you doing tonight?
Good evening. I'm great. Thank you. Let me introduce our special guest. His name is John Nichols. John is a famous political blogger and author who writes about politics for The Nation magazine. He's also a contributing writer for The Progressive and In These Times, and the associate editor of the Capital Times, a daily newspaper in Madison, Wisconsin. John has appeared on the WSLR Peace and Justice Report and has spoken twice in person at Fogartyville. He's a frequent guest on national radio and TV programs and as a commentator on politics and media issues. John is the author of many, many books, including his most recent one, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, The Enduring Legacy of Henry Wallace's Anti-Fascist, Anti-Racist Politics. I read another one of his books called The S Word, which is about the long tradition of socialism in America. Great book. So John is also prolific on Twitter, and his handle is Nichols Uprising. Finally, Gore Vidal once said of John, I love this quote, "Of all the giant slayers now afoot in the great American desert, John Nichols' sword is the sharpest." So welcome, John.
Hey, it's an honor to be with you, Tom, and an honor to be with all the folks who are joining us. And thanks to Arlene for doing all the good work of setting stuff up. I noticed that we have the same backdrop.
Oh, you and I?
Yeah, we both got a lot of books behind us.
Yeah, 2 of them are yours, John.
Oh, I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, I got Tropocalypse and The S Word, but I couldn't find your others. And some of them are on Kindle, of course, which I was reading today. We'll talk about those.
I'll be glad to sign your Kindle.
So John, tell us your impression. Tell us about the election.
Well, it was on November 3rd, and that used to have meaning. Election Day used to, something that we would remember. Nowadays, of course, what we have to understand is that we have kind of rolling elections that begin long before the voting day and obviously do not end immediately after. But let's talk a little bit about what this election means and what we know so far. And it's a big deal. I'll talk for just a few minutes up front here, and then Tom will come back in and ask some questions. I'll try and give some answers. Then we'll also take questions from all the folks who are joining us tonight. So I'm real excited to be with you. Delighted by the work that is done by the folks down there in Sarasota, both with 96.5 and also with Fogartyville, which I think is just a model, not just for Sarasota and Florida, but for the whole country of how you do progressive activism that is informative, highly engaged, and fun, that gives people a place to go and something to be a part of. And so it thrills me to join you tonight. And I wish that we could be talking about a little bit better news in Florida. But there is obviously a lot of good organizing and activism going on there. And I can tell you from having covered politics all over this country in all sorts of settings that you go up and you go down and then you go up again. And so we'll talk about some of that in a bit. Now, on the election, I think there's a few things that are really important to keep conscious of. First off, this is not a close election. Our media doesn't do a very good job of covering politics in this country. And so it tends to reduce everything down to a horse race and basically a personality-driven politics, a personality-driven narrative that is very, very engaged with the excitement of two people competing with one another. When in reality, politics is about a great deal more than that. It's about the great mass of people participating and engaging all over the country, not just in a handful of battleground states. That's what I mean by the media not being very good at covering politics, because we end up in a situation where we think, wow, there's only a handful of votes separating Donald Trump and Joe Biden in Georgia. Only a handful of votes, a small number of votes in Arizona. And even in my own state of Wisconsin, where there's about a 20,000 vote difference. But if you pull back and look at the whole country, and remember, we're electing a president of the entire United States, then you recognize that this isn't a close election at all. As of today, Joe Biden has a 5 million vote lead over Donald Trump. 5 million votes. That's a bigger lead than John Kennedy had in 1960 by a long distance. It's a bigger lead than Richard Nixon had in 1968. It's a bigger lead than Bill Clinton had in either of his presidential elections. Or I should say, I take it back. It is a more substantial lead than he had in some of his elections, not all, but in a number of them. It's a much bigger lead than George W. Bush had in either of his presidential elections. It's a much, much bigger lead than Donald Trump had, because Donald Trump didn't even have a lead. And so when we put it in perspective, we have to understand that Biden has won substantially. And it isn't just that he's won by a lot over what Donald Trump has. He's won by a lot in comparison with past presidential elections. And what do I mean by that? Well, a good example of it is that in 1980, when Ronald Reagan was elected president, it was said that he had a mandate, a substantial win, which he did, and also a substantial portion of the American electorate, a notable portion. He had around 50.8%. Well, 50.7%, I think Reagan had. Well, as of today, Biden has a 50.8% win, a slightly better percentage of the overall electorate than Ronald Reagan had in 1980. He has a substantially larger portion of the electorate than Bill Clinton had in 1992 or 1996. Obviously, a much bigger portion than George W. Bush had in 2000, but also dramatically bigger than what you saw with Donald Trump, because again, Trump lost in 2016 in the popular vote. Why do I go through all of these numbers? Because we need to break ourselves out of the habit of thinking that just because we watch this electoral college, that's the only measure of where things are at. It's important to think in that way for a reason, because too often we look at an election result and we say, how could my friends and neighbors be so wrong? I mean, how could this country give such a large vote to Donald Trump, someone who has been such a horrible, horrible failed president of the United States and such a damaging president of the United States? Well, look, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you Trump didn't get a lot of votes. He did. He's around 70 million votes at this point. But 75 million people have voted for Joe Biden, a substantially larger number. And so that's one way of beginning to put things into perspective. Another way to put things into perspective is to look at what's happening with the Electoral College. And the great challenge of the 2020 election for Democrats was to win back the key states of what was called the blue wall. And that's Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Those are the three states that in 2016 broke with their traditional Democratic voting patterns and elected Donald Trump president, because they're small margins of victory for Donald Trump. And it was terribly small. In Wisconsin, around 22,000 votes. In Michigan, around 10,000 votes. In Pennsylvania, around 40,000 votes. That was sufficient to give Donald Trump the electoral votes he needed to become president of the United States. So Democrats had to win that back. That was the essential challenge of the 2020 presidential election. Well, what did they do? They won Wisconsin back, and it was narrow, only about 20,000 votes in at least the initial count. They won Michigan back by a very substantial margin. You're talking in the range, I believe, of around 150,000 votes at this point. And they've won Pennsylvania back in an ongoing count, but still very clear victory. And that victory also will be quite substantial, much bigger than what Trump won by in 2016. So in the core challenge of the election, Democrats succeeded in achieving their basic goal, but they also achieved some other goals that are quite significant. For instance, Minnesota is a state that almost fell to Donald Trump in 2016. There's only about a 40,000 vote difference. This time around, Minnesota has pretty close to a landslide victory for Joe Biden. He's ahead, I believe, 52 to 45, 52%, 45%. So a very big victory there. And then beyond that area, you start to look at eastern Nebraska, where you have a single congressional district that can go, because Nebraska breaks its electoral college votes up differently, it could go Democrat or Republican. Joe Biden won that district. That's another place of breakthrough in, a part of the country, in the center of the country, where Democrats have to do a lot of work and, frankly, a measure of success. And then the big ticket items here, obviously, Arizona and Georgia. If you'd asked me just a few years ago whether a Democratic ticket would win Arizona or Georgia, I'd say eventually, but it's a good ways down the track in our historical progression. We're not there yet. The demographics have not changed sufficiently. The politics has not changed sufficiently. But it looks, as of tonight, like Joe Biden will win both Arizona and Georgia. Now, it won't be by large margins. Those are close counts. There's no question of that. And there will very probably be recounts. I understand that. But the fact that a Democrat has gotten over the line in those two states, and in fact, the fact that in both those states in 2018, they had highly competitive elections, which saw the Democrats win a Senate seat in Arizona, come very close to, and in fact, I would argue, really got to the point of winning the governorship in Georgia, means that there is a shift going on in the country. And it's a significant shift, one that points us in the direction of a different and hopefully more encouraging politics. Now, beneath this presidential level, you see some results from Senate races across the country, which were not as good as some of the polls suggested. And that's a significant thing to take in. The Democratic Party continues to have a huge problem with mounting a full ticket message, i.e., it can put it together for a presidential race, but as we saw in the Clinton and Obama presidencies, that didn't necessarily mean that the party held on to its strength as you went down ballot. Now, it might in a particular election, but it didn't hold. And this is an area that ought to be of substantial concern for the Democratic Party. The fact of the matter is they did not do as well in the Senate races as the amount of spending that they did, the candidate recruitment and other things. And so there's a lot of work to go there. I'd say two areas they have to be very focused. Number one, they have to be focused in that kind of coherent national message. There has to be a point to voting for the Democratic Party rather than simply voting against someone who you don't like, in this case, a Donald Trump. It's got to go up and down with a much more cogent message as regards what you want to accomplish. And then the second thing is they have to listen to people at the grassroots a lot more. They imposed candidates in some states who frankly didn't turn out to be very good candidates. The classic example is Kentucky, where they imposed Amy McGrath as a candidate. And, she had some things to recommend her, but she wasn't as strong as the candidate who ran against her in the primary, Charles Booker. If Booker had been nominated, I can't tell you that he would have necessarily won the election, but I can tell you that he would have run a far more exciting and engaged campaign. I certainly would have done better than Amy McGrath. And that's a lesson for the Democrats in Washington. Telling people at the grassroots, who Washington thinks is the best candidate is often the worst strategy for winning critical races. But Democrats got a reward, if you will, a gift. And that is that despite the fact that they did not do as well in the Senate races as they had hoped to do, they have an opportunity to, essentially redo the game a little bit and potentially win control of the Senate. There are two runoffs, as people know, in Georgia. I've watched those runoffs very, very closely, and I can tell you that both John Ossoff and the Reverend Raphael Warnock are incredibly strong candidates. They are very, very good at what they do. And in this case, what they do is try to win Senate seats. In the case of Reverend Warnock, he's a newcomer to statewide politics in Georgia, without a doubt. but he's got great skills in this area. He's the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, which of course is the spiritual home of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and is brilliant communicator, as well as someone who's got a deep moral sense and an ability to talk about that in ways that have tremendous potential, I think, to resonate politically in Georgia. Obviously, that was true in the primary or in the initial voting, because Reverend Warnock ran first ahead of incumbent appointed Senator Kelly Loeffler, as well as Congressman Doug Collins, who was in that race and ran further behind. In the other race, Ossoff got in at a early stage, was not initially seen as a particularly powerful challenger to the incumbent senator in that state, or incumbent Republican senator, but in fact closed the gap very, very effectively, and it held the incumbent, David Perdue, below the 50% threshold. He'll be in this runoff. It's close. There may be a recount, but my sense is that Ossoff is there. For Democrats, this becomes the most critical election of the post-election period and maybe of the next several years. Why? Because if they win these two seats, then they'll have a 50-50 split in the Senate. That will allow Vice President Kamala Harris to break a tie and essentially give Democrats a controlling position in the Senate. That then opens the door to a host of bold initiatives, which frankly they have to do. And if they can, they have a potential to govern effectively. If they can't, and I hate to tell folks, but this is a really, really vital reality to understand. If they can't, Mitch McConnell will be in position to obstruct the Biden-Harris administration. That obstruction will be very, very damaging politically, because it will prevent Biden and Harris from doing the things they need to do, both with appointments and also with policy. But more importantly, it'll be destructive to the country. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will come to power in a very, very difficult moment for this country. I don't have to tell people who are listening in. The next president of the United States will have to deal immediately with a coronavirus pandemic that is out of control, that is a huge challenge and will grow to be a much bigger challenge. In fact, right around the time of an inauguration, it's going to be just an awful mess by most accounts. We will have tremendous numbers of people hospitalized, our entire healthcare system taxed to the brink. And beyond that, we will have the economic fallout of it. And that economic fallout is severe already. It will be more severe. It will have a profound impact on many of our industries and frankly on people's lives, just on how to get by. There needs to be tremendous federal intervention. The best estimates are that we'll need a $4 trillion stimulus to jumpstart the economy coming out of the pandemic, and also, frankly, to make sure that we renew local governments, schools, all the institutions that have kind of been, pulled pushed to their extremes by the responsibility of dealing with this. Beyond that, we're in a moment of justified and necessary outcry for a change in how we do policing and for criminal justice reform. And beyond that forms the baseline for a broader push to address systemic racism in this country. We're at a critical juncture on these issues. We have a real opportunity to do big things, necessary things. But to do that, there has to be a Congress that's willing to work on not just criminal justice issues, but a host of economic and social issues that relate to and extend from the historic oppression and denial of rights to a substantial portion of our society, our African-American community, and also, frankly, to a lot of other communities that frankly are crying out for justice at a point where we can no longer, as a country, deny the reality that systemic racism and structural racism has created dramatic inequality and dramatic unfairness in our society. And then finally, we have a climate crisis. I don't have to tell people in Florida that this climate crisis is so severe that it is changing everything about how we live already, on a much faster pace than people had thought. And so the next administration has to deal with that. The trouble is that in dealing with all these things, you're going to need resources. You're going to have to spend money. And to do that, there has to be a restructuring of how we think about our budgets. You have to take money from the Pentagon and move it over to human needs. You also have to tax the very, very wealthy. There's just basic things that have to be done. If those things are not done, we will not have the resources to begin to address many of the challenges that frankly are going to cost money to address and can be dealt with. The money is there. As Franklin Roosevelt proved in the 1930s, we have the resources to address a coronavirus pandemic. We have the resources to address mass unemployment. We have the resources to address systemic racism. We have the resources to address a climate crisis. And we have the policy plans and ideas to do it. People are ready to step up. But to make all that happen, you have got to shift those 2 Senate seats. And so Georgia becomes just a critical battle and one that we should pay tremendous attention to. I'm going to close off my remarks up front with one final element of this, and it relates to sort of a struggle that's going on right now, and that is over how to complete the count. And a lot of people are very tense about what Donald Trump is doing at this point. There's simply no question that Donald Trump is a bad player, a bad actor, and he is refusing to concede a race that he has clearly lost, as I laid out at the start of our conversation. He will even more clearly lose it as the count goes on. And this can make people extremely worried, and I think correctly, appropriately. But it becomes very, very important in a moment like this for progressives to keep a good sense of where we're at, what's been accomplished, and what will be accomplished in the time to come. What Trump is doing is lawless. It is incredibly irresponsible. It is damaging to the process. It is damaging to our understanding of and respect for democracy. The job of progressives is to push back aggressively on this, to identify Trump as the bad player that he is and give him no ground. By the same token, the other duty of progressives, and frankly of Democrats in this point, is to not be so distracted by Trump's outburst and by his refusal to accept a reality that they miss the critical duties of the transition period. This next administration, because of the challenges we've laid out, is going to have excellent appointments, excellent strategies, and an excellent political agenda parallel to its policy agenda. And all that has to be put into place immediately. You can't waste time on this. And so it's a 2-tier struggle in a sense. One part of that struggle is to obviously counter Trump wherever he rears his ugly head, and make sure that he does not disrupt, destabilize, or frankly divide us even more than we already are divided. My view is that at this point he's failing on a lot of these fronts already, and that's to the good. He'll fail on more, but he will become more desperate. You have to push back against that. By the same token, again, that 2-tier struggle, you have to be very, very focused on making sure that on January 20th, 2021, when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris take office, that they will be able to hit the ground running. There is no time. There will be no honeymoon. It will not be easy. The next 4 years will be one of the most challenging times in our country's history. But getting it right immediately, moving fast on the things that must be dealt with, and hopefully with a Senate they can work with, makes it possible to get people invested in this new administration. That investment, that sense that something real is happening and that they can be supportive of it, makes it possible to then look at the 2022 election and the 2024 election, not as a repeat of what we saw in 1994 when a Democratic administration was disempowered, or in 2010 when a new Democratic administration was disempowered by Republican wave elections, but a point at which we can make our comparisons back to, say, 1934, when a FDR got an actually bigger majority in the playout of that 1932 New Deal election. It's absolutely important that Democrats go big, that they push as hard as they can, seek to achieve as much as is possible in the early stages of a Biden-Harris administration, because if they don't, the disappointment will indeed lead to setbacks in 2022 and 2024. So a lot to be done very, very fast, a lot of deep responsibilities, a lot of deep challenges, but not so many deep responsibilities and not so many challenges that we shouldn't take a moment at least to celebrate the fact that in a very short amount of time, around 70 days, Donald Trump will no longer be the president of the United States. And on that, I'll invite Tom back.
Well, I agree with you. I celebrate that fact. I have a couple of things I want to ask you, but before that, I noticed a viewer typed in a question about Florida. Tell us more about
what?
Florida. What happened in Florida?
Well, how dare someone from Wisconsin tell Floridians what happened in their state? Look, I will tell you that there's going to be a lot of bad analysis of what happened in Florida. And that bad analysis will try and suggest that, the Republicans did very, very well in accusing Joe Biden of being a closet socialist, that the Republicans did very, very well in, exploiting police issues and all the protests of the summer. They'll give you all of that. And if you want to fall for that, that's fine. I'll accept it. And in fact, if you tell me I'm wrong, I'll have to listen. But my sense is that what happened in Florida was that it was a very, very incoherent campaign. And I think the Florida Democratic Party at the statewide level, from what I've heard and what I've seen, really needs to do an autopsy and look a lot more closely at what their messaging is from top to bottom and how the structural stuff they do. I think they also have to be conscious of the fact that there's always a number of new people coming into Florida. There's got to be a targeting and some organizing work done as regards not just the Latinx community, but all of the communities. And that means to go into a deeper organizing, not to, kind of whipsaw from election to election, but be conscious of the fact that that campaign headquarters have to stay open, year in, year out. They don't close down. That once we can do it again, the door knocking can't stop. I mean, there's a building process that political parties engage in. Now, I'm not trying to beat up on the Florida Democratic Party. The challenges of the Florida Democratic Party are the challenges that Democratic parties across the United States face. Many of them have faced it. The reason I bring this up is to tell you, I live in Wisconsin, as an example. Wisconsin had a nightmarish 2010s. It started with the election of Scott Walker as governor in 2010 with a Republican legislature. They redrew all the district lines, gerrymandered the state, brought in Koch brothers money, assaulted our labor unions. It was awful. And then, you went through that period and you built up to the point in 2016 when Donald Trump carried the state of Wisconsin, a state that had voted Democratic in 1988, 1992, 1996, 2000, 2004, 2008, and 2012. Suddenly, we've got a Republican governor who's a wrecking crew character. We've got a terrible legislature that is doing awful stuff, and we're starting to vote for Republicans for president. It was like, everything seemed to be going wrong. And then came 2018 with a real pullback. Democratic Party started to get its act together, started to do a lot deeper organizing, started to do a lot more work. People in rural areas didn't close their headquarters. They kept them open on the main streets year in, year out. There's all sorts of genuine structural change. Not all of it perfect, but in 2018, if you can imagine it, after that terrible decade up to that point, Democrats elected the governor, the lieutenant governor, the state treasurer, the attorney general, the secretary of state, and they won the U.S. Senate seat. They also had minimal, because of gerrymandering, progress in the legislative elections. And then 2020, the winning of the state by the Democratic nominee for president, pulling back to that old voting. Can I tell you Wisconsin's perfect? No, we went through hell. We were going through worse stuff than Florida, and politically, but A, people didn't give up. B, they made changes that were necessary. And C, and I really can't emphasize this enough, they started listening to younger folks. And the president or the chairman of the state Democratic Party in Wisconsin is in his 30s. He's a grassroots organizer who came out of MoveOn.org. He was the key organizer in the fight in Washington, D.C. to protect the Affordable Care Act. And then he came home to Wisconsin, took over the Democratic Party. And I cannot begin to emphasize how creative and innovative the Democratic Party has become in the last few years. And we could tell you a similar story in Georgia with what Stacey Abrams and other people have done there. So what I would suggest is, you asked me what happened in Florida. You know a lot more about it than I do. But from minimal observation I have, I would suggest to you that what happened there in Florida is what's happened in a lot of other states. And you want to study, in my opinion, what's happened in Wisconsin, what's happened in Georgia, where there's evidence that you can make structural changes in how you go about politics and get better at it. In politics, the lesson is always the same. And that is that you never fight the last election. You always fight the next one. And the only reason you focus on the last election is to learn your mistakes. Never look back on your last election to learn what you did right, because remember, you never fight the last election again. But look at the mistakes you made and try to stop making them. And I know there are young leaders in Florida right now who are speaking up very loudly about what they see as the need to change the Democratic Party, some of the Democratic Party's approaches. And I would suggest that even if it's painful, and even if you do disagree it sometimes, it's very, very important to start to listen to them.
That brings up a problem in Florida and probably elsewhere in the country. Your latest book is called The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party. And as you point out in your preface, even though it's originally about Henry Wallace in the 1940s and his fights, that fight for the soul is still going on today. The fight for the soul of the party. Centrist Democrats and progressives are accusing each other of damaging the chances of Democratic candidates. What do you think, and how do we solve that particular problem?
Well, let's first figure out what people want, because if you're arguing for a progressive point of view and people don't want that, if we really are a right-wing country, then you got a problem.
Yeah.
But of course, this gets to the heart of something that happened in Florida, which I've been talking about for the last week. And that is, in the state of Florida, you didn't vote for Joe Biden for president, but you did vote for a great big increase in the minimum wage.
Right.
Well, how the hell does that happen? Right? I mean, how do you get this victory for one of the core issues that frankly progressives have been working on for a long time, but not a victory in the presidential race? I can tell you exactly what it is, that the Democrats, even now, after all the work that has been done, they will adopt a good platform. They will even give an occasional good speech on it, but they won't run on it. They won't go out there and actually say, Biden's ads in Florida should have said, vote for Joe Biden and for an increase in the minimum wage. They should have linked those two right up. And the fact of the matter is that Democrats don't do a good job of communicating how they will actually improve people's lives. And they do a good job of saying we're better than the Republicans. Joe Biden has done an excellent job of saying he's a better person than Donald Trump. But remember, this is one of the things that doesn't go into the analysis as much as it should. And that is that there were a tremendous number of people who were Trump voters who would say to you, no, I don't like him, but I'm going to vote for him. So then you have to step back from that and say, okay, you don't like him. Why are you going to vote for him? Well, maybe you're very anti-choice, right? You want to ban abortion, and you're thrilled with Donald Trump because he's appointing anti-choice judges. Now, you may dislike him as a person, but you're voting for him because of the policy. And you can go down that on a number of issues. Now, Democrats need to develop much more of that. Democrats try too hard to make you like the candidate, right? But they don't try hard enough to make you value the issues. And this really is the fight for the soul of the Democratic Party, because we have, frankly, centrist and center-right forces in the Democratic Party who keep preaching a gospel that the country is a centrist nation, or even a center-right country. It's false. That is not the case. I'm not even going to use, liberal sources or progressive sources. I'll use the Fox News exit polling from the election. The Fox News exit polling showed that roughly 70% of people want a government-run healthcare program, or at least a government program on healthcare that allows them to access their healthcare through an alternative to the private sector. Roughly 70%. Roughly 70% of people say that we need to do major action to address climate change, and particularly we need to alter how we approach energy issues and fossil fuels and things of that nature. And almost 70% say that we need dramatic change in our policing, up to and including a complete overhaul of policing in this country. And what does that tell you? Well, we're being told, the Medicare for All is somehow a bad thing, that Democrats can't be for it. No, if you look at the polling data, there's tremendous support for ideas that may not be exactly Medicare for All, but certainly embrace huge components of it. Green New Deal is some sort of terrible thing. If Green New Deal is mentioned, people run screaming from the room. No, the polling shows that many of the underpinnings of the Green New Deal are incredibly attractive with voters. And then they'll say, oh yeah, well, calling, for making fundamental changes in policing and ending racial profiling and frankly, police violence toward people of color, that somehow that's a losing issue. No, the polling shows that's a winning issue. And so one of the things that Democrats, I would argue, have to start doing is leading from their strengths. They, instead of, I think we often hear people say, oh, well, don't rely on the polls. I disagree. Rely on the polls. Look at what the polls tell you is popular. People desperately want an increase in their wages. People desperately want to have assurances on healthcare. People desperately want to make education more affordable. People desperately want to address racial injustice, and people desperately want to save the planet from burning. These are popular issues. And the fact is, when they go soft, Democrats they may win back the middle a little bit, and that may work marginally in one race, but it doesn't give you that top to bottom victory that frankly is what the country needs. And so in the book, I do argue that the Democratic Party is failing not just itself, but failing the country by not being dramatically more progressive.
One person wrote in, do progressives, what do we do if we cannot take the Senate? In other words, I know there's been a lot of articles, what Biden himself can do without the U.S. Senate, what he can do as an executive. Have you looked into that?
I have. And look, here's the starting point. I've covered Joe Biden for a very, very long time. Interviewed him. I've seen him in a lot of settings. And my sense is that he is a man of Washington. He may live in Wilmington, but he's really been a part of the Washington consensus now for the better part of 50 years. Remember, when he was declared the winner on Saturday, that was the 48th anniversary of when he was declared the winner of his first U.S. Senate race. So the fact of the matter is, this guy has been around D.C. for a very, very long time. That is a danger in some ways, because when you're part of that D.C. consensus, sometimes you will go toward compromise and you'll go toward too much compromise. That's a problem. The flip side of that, though, is that it does tell you how to do things. You know your way around the politics of the city. You know your way around the challenges that you will come at. And Joe Biden does have those strengths. And so what progressives have to do is push him to not compromise and to burrow into his strengths. What can he do immediately on January 20th, whether he's got the Senate or not? He can reverse all of Trump's executive orders, every one of them. And you can do it in one shot. In fact, it would be a very positive way to open up at 12:01 on that January 20th in the afternoon, and just get rid of all of them. There's a lot of bad stuff in there. Remember that what Trump has put into those executive orders is really, really dangerous stuff, really bad stuff. And now you say, well, one thing he did was he did this thing on pre-existing conditions. Hey, you find one that's got something decent, you can keep that. That's fine. But you review them all, at least with the idea of getting rid of them overwhelmingly. And frankly, if the deliberations for the Supreme Court today are any indication, it looks like the Affordable Care Act may survive. And as a result, we should recognize even the gimmicky executive orders that Trump did probably should be undone with an idea toward just clean slate. And if there's something where Biden needs to come in, he should. But that's step one, get rid of the bad stuff. Step two, executive orders are powerful. You can do a lot with it. Trump did and really stretched the limits. I suspect that there will be some pullback and some pushback on it, but Biden should push the limits there. He can do a lot on immigration policy. He can do a great deal on our climate responses. He can get us back into the Paris discussions. He can do a lot as regards global peace and negotiations and diplomacy on bringing troops home from places, which interestingly enough, he has been sympathetic to some of this. He can also do a lot on the Iran nuclear deal and get us back into those negotiations. And so there's a good deal that can be done. He can also lead from the bully pulpit. And I can't emphasize how important it is to have a president of the United States who's talking to us about the pandemic in a realistic way. That's an immediate thing he can do. And frankly, I would argue the guy ought to be doing fireside chats, maybe fireside chat with a camera now, but he should be talking to the nation in very clear, very cogent ways about what we have to do to get through this. We're going to need, in the middle of this, what he has referred to as a dark winter, a message about solidarity and a message about mutual aid, how we help one another. It's going to be tough. I'm not going to lie to you. And so that he can do, and he should. He should fully utilize Kamala Harris. She's a great communicator. She's an incredibly effective legislator. She has great strengths. And I think that because Biden was a vice president himself, he will recognize that everything he does to strengthen her, to amplify her, to get her out front is going to be valuable and is going to be really, really important. Now, the next stage of it is, just quickly, his appointments become incredibly important. It's going to be hard because a lot of his appointments have to go through the Senate. If he doesn't have the Senate, those are going to be real battles. He has to pick carefully, intelligently, with an eye toward getting the strongest people into position to begin to restore agencies that have been literally gutted by the Trump administration. And so remember, appointments are policy too. Personnel is policy. And so we want to work really, really hard in that area. And that's very vital. The final thing is this, the political project, which he can do even if he doesn't have the Senate. He needs to rebuild the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party did not do a good enough job in the 2020 election, even with the benefit of Donald Trump. And even with the fact that it was a substantial popular vote win, clearly the disappointing results in Senate races and the disappointing results in House races and down ballot means that the Democratic Party itself has to fundamentally change. It can't keep going the way that it is. And a president has a lot of power to do that. He should definitely work on it. So there's a lot that can be done, but I'm not going to lie to you. Without the Senate, it's going to be deeply frustrating and deeply challenging. And it will become the responsibility, I think, particularly of Kamala Harris, to speak to the nation, to travel the country a great deal on a regular basis, and to call this Senate out. If they're not acting on issues, then you call them a do-nothing Senate, and you take them on in a very, very aggressive and very, very blunt way. That, again, is a part of the political project.
Yeah, are you, speaking of appointments and cabinets, are you, I noticed today you tweeted something about Attorney General Barr. If he goes interfering with elections, perhaps he should be impeached. Talk about that. What do you expect to happen or might happen?
Well, we're in a pretty messy situation right now. The Attorney General of the United States, who is acting as a lawyer for the president, which is not his job. He's supposed to be our lawyer, not the president's lawyer. president has a White House counsel who's supposed to do that. But Barr has broken all of the protocols, all the traditions. And today, or yesterday, last night, he threw out one of the core underpinnings of an independent Department of Justice. And that is, he got rid of the requirement that the Department of Justice have a non-intervention approach to elections. And he basically, I did tell federal prosecutors that they are authorized to examine what he refers to as, election irregularities or fraud. I mean, he's politicizing the department in a profound way. I believe he should be impeached. I'm not alone in this regard. Senator Elizabeth Warren said, in frankly talking about what happened last night, said that he should have been impeached months ago. And you have a bill in the House of Representatives from Steve Cohen, who's the congressman from Memphis, a key player on the House Judiciary Committee, to investigate and impeach William Barr. Why do I favor that at this point? Because I know there's people who say, oh, well, impeachment didn't work against Donald Trump. Well, I'll tell you, I'm not sure it didn't work. The fact of the matter is, it was the right thing to do. It was necessary to do. The Senate refused to do so, but Donald Trump's been beaten for re-election as president of the United States. I know there's a lot of other factors, but I'm not of the view that impeachment is a third rail that you shouldn't touch. And I do think that at this point, moving articles of impeachment against William Barr because of what he's done to politicize the Department of Justice would be a good pushback. I know that Mitch McConnell's not going to take it up. I understand that. I'm not unrealistic. But I see impeachment, I wrote a book about it, I see it as a tool that can be used to highlight the crisis. And at this point, I would like to see the House of Representatives, I'd like to see them come into session tomorrow morning and move articles of impeachment against William Barr and take the action, knowing that the Senate won't do so, but also highlighting the fact that this man has corrupted his office in ways that are absolutely indefensible. And frankly, Mike Pompeo over at the Department of State appears to be doing some of the same stuff. And this is deeply irresponsible and damaging to American democracy. We ought to call it out, and we shouldn't hesitate to call it out in very blunt and very aggressive ways.
You have any good ideas for a Biden cabinet?
Sure, I can pack it out for you. I got to get Tom Walker in there right away. He's a young, vibrant, smart guy. He'd do a great job. No, look, the Biden cabinet's going to be a complex cabinet to put together. The danger, in my opinion, is that Joe Biden knows so many people who've been around Washington so long that it'd be very, very easy for him to staff it out with people who were in not just the Obama White House, but the Clinton White House. You go back to people who've been around forever, especially on the economic issues. I'd recommend strongly against that. I think it's a very, very dangerous approach. I think that what Joe Biden needs to do is to, use the best and the brightest where they are there. And it doesn't matter what their age are. I don't mind if it's somebody who's 90 years old who's got the best ideas. But I also think that it's going to be very valuable to have a few people who are 35 years old and have great ideas. I do think that while I happen to disagree with Pete Buttigieg on some issues, that he's a person who should almost certainly be in the cabinet in some position. And he's been angling for a couple positions, and I don't disregard that. I think it's an appropriate place. I'd like to see Stacey Abrams considered because, if they don't make her chair of the Democratic National Committee, I'd like to see her in some way brought up. Both of these are young stars who are rising in the party. Now, in some of the key positions, I think it's really important to consider the unfortunate reality of the Senate. If the Senate was controlled by the Democrats, if there was real clarity as regards the Senate, I would say that I think Elizabeth Warren should be Secretary of the Treasury. I'd take her out. But you can't take her out at this point. Massachusetts has a Republican governor. Just removing her from the Senate at this point, even if they get the 2 seats in Georgia, would put you in a minority situation where the Senate then wouldn't approve her nomination to be Secretary of Treasury. So you got a problem there. There's talk of Janet Yellen, who was formerly at the Fed, as a possible Secretary of the Treasury. That's an interesting pick. Yellen was actually pretty good at the Fed on a lot of issues, and so I'd be interested in that, although I think there has to be a good deal of betting. There are a number of former senators and other players who could be good figures bringing into positions. I think of Heidi Heitkamp, who I disagree with on a number of issues, but she's a credible contender, I think, in some people's eyes, to be Secretary of Agriculture, and that'll be something that's discussed. I also think that perhaps the most important appointments are going to be in places that we don't pay as much attention to, and that includes the Department of Energy and Department of Interior. It is very, very important that the people who are in charge of those departments are people who are on the right side of climate issues. By the way, on ag, that is a challenge with Heitkamp on some issues. So I don't mind people raising those concerns. And when we talk about people who are on the right side of climate issues, going to a place like Interior, you're going to be talking about perhaps a former Senator Tom Udall or Deb Haaland, who is a member of Congress from New Mexico, who's expressed some interest in it, and I think would be a fantastic pick. And so there's people who to fill these positions without a doubt. But it is vital that you not just fill them with big names, but also you fill them with the right names, people who can actually use those positions in a way that raises up the issues that are necessary and frankly does the rebuilding. One of the toughest appointments, two of the toughest appointments are going to be at the Department of Justice. We've just been talking about William Barr. We know that the next Attorney General is going to have a huge, huge challenge ahead of him or her. I've been intrigued by the suggestions that Sally Yates be brought back and put in charge of the department, which she served so ably before being, essentially forced out by Trump and his crew. There's also talk of Doug Jones, the former senator, now soon to be former senator from Alabama, who has an incredible record on civil rights cases and is a very honorable man. And so those are both possibilities. And then when we get over to the Department of State, I think that Department of State rebuilding that is going to be an incredible challenge, and one that I think happens to be one perhaps beyond my pay grade to tell you who should be there, but they're going to need an incredibly strong and brilliant Secretary of State. There will be an inclination on the part of Joe Biden to bring back John Kerry, who did serve very ably there, but I don't happen to be excited by that idea. I'm hoping that he will look at some of the younger thinkers and doers in the area of foreign policy and get somebody in there who really is committed to rebuilding a lot of our relationships around the world, particularly as regards international agreements, but also somebody who is committed to dialing back our interventionist military policies and moving us more toward a diplomatic approach to the rest of the world. So a lot of work to be done on the cabinet, but lots of names floating around. And rather than me going through it all and spending the rest of our time doing that, I'd recommend Politico, the political website, had a review of all the names or a lot of the names that are in play right now for potential cabinet positions. And there's some pretty exciting folks. I will tell you one final thing too. If Democrats get control of the Senate, and if they were to get in a really good position there, then my recommendations for cabinet posts would become much more progressive very, very quickly. Because the fact of the matter is, as I say, personnel is policy. And so if Democrats have control of the Senate, then I would argue that some of the best places to make changes are by moving very, very progressive people into control of different agencies like Health and Human Services and Housing and Urban Development. Those are powerful, powerful agencies. So is the Department of Labor. And we have a young rising generation of progressive political figures who I would love to see in charge of cabinet agencies. I think that frankly, her future is elsewhere. But the truth of the matter is, just imagine putting Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in charge of Health and Human Services. Just imagine putting we can run down the list of names of people who have the potential to do incredible things in these places. And that's how the Biden administration ultimately should think about these offices. They should think about them as places that you put brilliant young people who can actually transform them and excite the nation. That's what Franklin Roosevelt did at his very, very best. When he put Francis Perkins in charge of the Department of Labor, that was a signal of a desire to do something fundamentally different. When he put Henry Wallace in charge of the Department of Agriculture, that was a signal that he wanted to do things that were dramatically different. My dream, my wish would be that the Biden administration would do that. I am trying to be as realistic as I can, though, in recognizing the challenges that exist with the Senate.
Well, we have some questions about the Georgia race. How do we help?
Yeah.
How do we help them see your point about emphasizing what's important, like healthcare and education and climate? And how do we help there? I know we can send some money, but what else can we do for the Senate?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, in Georgia, there's a lot you can do, and obviously, money is a part of politics. But it's possible to make calls.
Yes.
Many of you have Southern accents, so you can pass as.
I can do that.
Yeah, exactly. So you're not that far away. I do think calling into states it can cut both ways, because if you frankly sound like you're from very far away, I'm not sure how much people listen to the call. But it's something to consider. I know that I live in Wisconsin, and we got postcards from people around the country asking us to vote for Biden this time around. And I think that had maybe some influence. But I guess let me ask you to think about it in a slightly different way. And that is, it's all hands on deck. And so any strategy that you've got to help win those 2 Senate seats, I think is vital at this point, because it will define, what's possible in the Biden administration. And one of the most powerful ways, I believe, is direct human contact, phone calls with people that you know. And so if you've got family in Georgia, if you've got friends in Georgia, even if it's a difficult conversation, maybe somebody's a little more conservative, call in and talk to them. It really matters. It does. So yeah, the money is a part of it, I suppose. And I understand that's a huge part in politics. But so too is that willingness to see Georgia now as what it is. And it is a nationalized contest. Georgia is the contest for the future of this administration, and frankly, for the future of the country. Because if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have to govern with one hand tied behind their backs, or maybe both hands tied because they're just so disempowered by Mitch McConnell, then that's a really, it's frankly a devastating reality. It's one that you don't want to live in. And so I realize it's the holiday season, a lot of stuff coming on, a lot of other things that can distract you. But frankly, we can't be distracted from that Georgia fight. Not this time. It's too important.
All hands on deck.
Yes, all hands on deck.
Well, John Nichols, we want to thank you so much for spending the hour with us and sharing your thoughts. We want to remind people about your book, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, The Enduring Legacy of Henry Wallace's Anti-Fascist, Anti-Racist Politics. So check that out. And we also want people to connect with John. He's always got interesting things to say. So connect with him on Twitter there. And Tom and I are going to be back tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. With the Peace and Justice Report. And we'll be talking about the history of WSLR. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about how this community radio station was founded and how we've grown, we hope that you'll tune in to 96.5 or join us on our Facebook page.
You can see her slides, which are excellent.
And if I can just close off with one last word. I hate doing these conversations this way because I can't see everybody and you can't talk to people before and after. Some of the best moments I've had as a speaker, and frankly, as somebody who travels around the country, have been at Fogartyville, and in that very human, very real place of contact, sitting around, meeting people, talking to them. And I think what you've created in Sarasota is absolutely beautiful and absolutely wonderful. This radio station, WSLR, is a treasure, and Fogartyville is a treasure. And the truth is, we've been through a tough time. We're going to continue to be in a tough time, but there's so much rebuilding that can be done after we come out of this. And I think that you're going to be so far ahead of the curve because you're maintaining these contacts here. And the truth is that our future is one of economic and social and racial justice. We'll save our planet, and we will reorient our priorities so that we don't spend all of our money on a military industrial complex, that we move money to human needs that we can address. We can make people's lives so much better. And I know that the people who are associated with WSLR and also the people associated with Fogartyville, and frankly, all the people who've joined us tonight, are at the heart of that struggle. I know there's a lot of work to do in Florida. There's a lot of work to do all across this country. But as long as you keep at it, I'm absolutely confident that the future is better than what we know today. And in fact, that we will indeed achieve economic and social and racial justice. We'll save the planet, and we'll know peace. Thanks for having me.
And on that note, we'll say thank you and good night.